I'll just say like what I plan to cover tonight. I'm going to talk about both retaking, since there's a significant audience here that has taken the LSAT already and needs to take it again, and just studying for the September LSAT in general. And that's going to be like 80% similar in terms of like how you should be studying, because the main issue is usually not like familiarity with the LSAT, it's understanding and intuition of the core concepts. The LSAT's not like other tests where you just need to memorize some stuff. The LSAT's actually testing your skills at reading, your skills at logic, your skills at reading precision, and those are things that, you know, you could study for years and not necessarily make any progress if you weren't actually focused on improving the underlying skills. Then I'm going to talk a bit about how to study for each section, a bit about the LSAT and its role in admissions. I'll give an and oh right, and the mindset to use for studying. I'm going to give an overview of what's on LSAT Hacks, including a course that I just announced. But before that, I'll be talking about the free resources on the site, and I'll describe the course. And oh right, and I also want to talk a bit about study materials and a couple things to mention for those who are retaking and may have used all the prep tests. There's a couple extra that not everyone has heard of. Okay, so how to study for the September LSAT. You've got about 3 months left at this point. Oh, good. Lucas had just dropped out, but she's back now. And the key to any studying, first I'll just start by saying that 3 months is a good amount of time to study. Whether or not you're retaking or whether or not you're taking the LSAT for the first time, that is a good amount of time. Because there's kind of two phases to LSAT improvement. You're going to find that there's sort of like an easy gain phase and then your plateau phase. The easy gain phase is pretty much no matter where you start, you're going to improve about 10 points. If you start low at like 135, that'll be a bit higher. Like I see, when I've seen people start at 135, usually they get to 150 without much difficulty. If you start high, if you start at 165, you're looking at more like 5 or 6 points. Like maybe you'll get to 171 without much difficulty. But that's roughly it. And most people are going to start more in the middle, and you're going to improve about 10 points almost no matter what you do. If you look at just about any course for the LSAT, they'll advertise like 10-point score improvement. Now, I'm not saying they're bad courses. Like that's just the increase you get, no matter what, as long as you're following a good method, is what I mean. So 10 points is the increase you get if you follow a reasonably good method. So no matter, and there's a bunch of methods that are reasonably good. So no matter which one you pick, you're going to improve about 10 points. And then beyond that, you get into a phase where it gets harder to improve because you've already made the easy gains. And what are the easy gains? The easy gains are they're the things that come from just learning the things that are easiest to learn. So on the LSAT, there's some questions that require like logical diagramming, and those are easier than questions that, that's an easy concept to learn. You can learn, like most people starting the LSAT don't know how to do logical diagrams. Once you learn them, you're going to get more points. They're easy to teach. Whereas some things, say dependent on like your knowledge of like certain vocabulary or just like how precise you can read, are going to be harder to improve. And so once you already study for a month or two, you have to work on the hard stuff. The other reason that you improve the most in like a month or two is because just you get more familiar with the test, you're going to get some intuition for certain things, and you're going to improve at the easiest bits. So in a 3-month study period, so why I'm bringing this up now is some people will start studying like a month before the test and they'll ask me, like, is this enough time to study? And not really. Like, you'll make some progress in a month, but you need about like 2 months to get that sort of like full progress that you're more or less entitled to if you use any reasonably good method. Then people ask, like, how long should I study when you already made that? That's when things get hard because improving beyond that depends on the way you're approaching the test and the attitude you've got to it. I don't mean attitude like, I can do this positive attitude. I mean like Are you analyzing what you're doing and actively working on errors? That kind of thing. Depending on your attitude there, you could, uh, maybe you need 3 more months, or maybe you could study forever and not make progress. I've found past the first couple of months, progress tends to depend more on how you're approaching the test than amount of time or amount of work. It's not a memorization test. It's not a test of hard work. You do need to work hard. You do need to learn things, but it's more a test of attitude. And I like to analogize it more to something like tennis or dancing, like learning one of those. You could play tennis for years and get no better, but there are ways to get better. You could record yourself while playing tennis. You could identify key skills and drill those skills. You could play against others to get feedback or try and get feedback on very specific stuff. You could have a coach to watch you. The difference between tennis and the LSAT is that a lot of stuff is actually easier to improve in tennis because, like I said, you can videotape yourself. You can see what you're doing in tennis. On the LSAT, you can't see what you're doing because what you're doing is inside your head for the most part. There are a few ways you can sort of measure yourself, but generally speaking, this is why the attitude is what's important, because you have to actively be looking for what you're doing and what you need to work on in a way that is not as hard to do in something like tennis or dance, where you can film yourselves or you can watch yourselves. Like I said, you can have a coach in tennis. You can hire a tutor for the LSAT, and there's some very good tutors. But what no tutor can do is see what you're actually doing inside your head. All they can do is ask you what you're doing, and it's not the same thing. So those are some of the difficulties involved, which is why I said that for people who have just started studying or haven't taken the LSAT yet, and for people retaking, it's actually pretty similar. Because once you study for 2 months, whether or not you took the LSAT, you're sort of in that area where improvement comes from having to self-analyze and figure out what you need to work on, rather than, just applying yourself to the work and doing it. I'm going to talk a bit about... Oh. I just noticed there's like 4 questions about recording. Yeah, there'll be a recording sent afterwards. Basically, I'm recording it right now. I'll just confirm that. Yep, it's recording right now. And once it's done, it'll process. I'll attach it to the webinar, and you'll get an email afterwards giving you the recording of the webinar. So, yeah, there will be a recording. Okay, so where was I? Right, so you've got to, whether or not you've taken the test or not, once you get past 2 months, you've got to be very analytical and think about what you're doing. I'm going to talk a bit about the attitude later. How to... Right now, I'm just going to mention a little bit about retakers specifically, because about 60% of this webinar is people who've already taken the LSAT and are studying to retake. And there's one overwhelming issue for people taking the LSAT again. And I'll note that this is relevant for you, for everyone that hasn't taken the LSAT, because you want to try and avoid this situation. But the single biggest problem faced by retakers is you run out of materials. You run out of prep tests. For the LSAT, there are 78, with the new June test, there are 78 numbered prep tests. And that seems like a lot, but yet frequently, when it comes time to study for the LSAT, people find they've actually gone through all of the material. So right now I'm going to talk about what to do if you're in that situation, if you're studying now, how to avoid that situation, and a couple of other prep tests. So what's the issue with running out of material? Well, when you're studying for the LSAT, you want to know where you're scoring. The way to know how you're scoring is to take a full timed prep test. And if you've taken all the material and you do a prep test that you've taken before, you're going to get somewhat better than you actually should. You may not remember the answers, but the material is going to be familiar, and you'll have some familiarity with it, and you're going to score higher than you would if it was totally unknown to you. But otherwise, one thing I want to make clear is that it's actually not a problem learning-wise to redo material. In fact, it's great. I've learned some of the most from seeing material multiple times. It's just you don't get accurate measurement. That's it. That's the only problem. So for a lot of people retaking, they think, they've used the material and it's not going to be useful anymore. That's not true. It's extremely useful. It's just you won't know your score. That's the only issue. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. So the way most people run out of material is there's 78 tests, but a lot of people use like the first 40 for drilling question types. Then they take maybe like 20 as time tests, and then they take time sections from the rest, or they've seen the rest in like a study book, like the LSAT trainer. Um, Seems hard to do, but before you know it, all like 78 tests are gone. Um, so what I would do if you haven't started studying is nobody wants to retake, but statistically, like I think like a third or a large number of people taking the LSAT will take it again. And actually, it's a good idea to take it again because if you're in America, law schools pretty much just take the highest score. They don't care about the others because they're only required to report the highest score. So even if you get, like, say you're aiming for a 165 and you get a 165, but sometimes you scored 167 and you think you still have some improvement to make, it can actually be worth a lot of money to keep studying, take it again in December, and get a score 2 points higher. That might get you into a better school. It might get you like $30,000 in scholarships. I mean, it's pretty rare that you're going to be able to earn $30,000 in 2 months. And there's almost no downside. Like even if you get a 163, they're still just going to look at the 165. So retaking is actually like a very good idea. But what you should do if you haven't taken yet is just like mark off, say like 10, if you're studying for September, mark off like 10 tests, some like maybe 5 recent ones, 5 middle of the road ones. And those are going to be your tests that you use to measure yourself if you're retaking again. So you've still got like 68 LSATs. Just mark off 10 tests and don't touch them. That's my only advice if you're not in a retake situation. Just you don't want to retake. You know, if you get like the best score you can get in September and you're done, it'll be a huge relief. But you should plan for the possibility that you might have to. As you saw, 60% of the people in this webinar are retaking, so it's really common. So mark off 10. Now for those that did retake, here's what you should do. First, make like an assessment of all the tests that you've done and see which ones you did like the longest time ago or the least questions from. And what you just want to identify is just ones that are going to be pretty close to accurate. And also, of course, in the assessment, check any that you just haven't touched. Those are great. And you don't need that many. Like just if you have like 4 or 5 untouched ones that you can take for measurement, like in a run up to the test, that's probably fine. The more the better, but like 4 is all right if you just take them like once a week in the month before the test. It's close enough if you combine it with other ones that, you know, you took a while ago and you've sort of forgotten. And if your scores on the totally fresh ones versus the ones you took a while ago are similar, then it turns out those older ones are also probably decent measurement too. There's a couple other things I should mention that people sometimes don't know about when they're retaking. One is just like sources of extra tests. So the first is this book called the Super Prep 2. I mean, if you haven't heard about the Super Prep, there's 3 tests in there that aren't in the numbered 78 tests. But Super Prep 2, it has tests 62 and 63, but it also has one other previously unreleased test that doesn't have a number that's new. So I find most people haven't heard about this. I'm going to send it in the chat. If you have used all your tests, there's another test in here. There's also the June 2007 LSAT. I expect most people have heard of this, but I'm mentioning it just in case because it doesn't have a number. Oh, for the people who haven't studied, so there's LSATs numbered 1 through 78. These run from like LSATs that were administered in like 1991 all the way up till now. Like 78 is the one that was administered in June 2016. They release 3 LSATs every year. So this is a free practice LSAT, June 2007 LSAT. It doesn't have a number. So the ones that don't have a number are the June 2007, the 3 in the Super Prep, the 1 in the Super Prep 2. And there's also one more. It's going to be hard to find, but it's called the February 1997 LSAT. This is the same as it was the old June 2007 LSAT, the one they released for free for people to use. You're going to have a lot of trouble finding that, but you might be able to track one down if you're really at a prep test. So I saw someone ask, for Canadian schools, do the retakes work the same way? Not at all. I mean, obviously, if you retake and you get higher, that's a good thing. But if you retake and you get lower, that's a bad thing. Canadian schools, in the States, schools are ranked explicitly on their LSAT and their GPA. So if they get higher LSAT GPA, they go higher in the rankings. It's not a great system actually. Like, because in an ideal world, someone who got a 170 in one try would look better than somebody who got like a um 170, 168, and 165. I mean, assuming they got like a 170 first and a 165, then a 168. That shows that the person who got the three ones, that was lucky high end of their range. But American schools basically can't assess you on anything but your GPA and your LSAT. Canadian schools don't face that same environment, and so they're actually able to assess, like, would this person make a good student? So the LSAT's part of it, multiple LSAT takes are part of it. You don't want to score high and then score lower. So in Canada, I would only retake if you felt reasonably confident you were going to score higher, meaning that, like, you had a bad test day and you scored below your average, or you've been improving and all of your scores are higher than your past score. Those are good situations to retake, but you don't want to do the kind of speculative retake that I was recommending for American students where there's basically no downside and a lot of upside to getting a higher score. Also, Canadian schools tend to have lower tuition and fewer scholarships, so it doesn't matter so much. Like, if you can get in, you're in, and that's great. At the States, you could get into a school, but tuition's like $50,000 a year, so you could either be paying $50,000 a year or zero per year, depending on your LSAT score. So, like, the payoff for a good LSAT is much higher in the States. So, I covered a variety of material there. I just want to pause and ask if anyone has any questions on just study materials, retaking, or that general outline I gave. Score cancellations, USA doesn't matter. Canada will consider. Um, oh, and by the way, do not, sorry for the person who asked this, but do not cancel your score unless you know affirmatively that you couldn't possibly have gotten a good score. This is very important to pay attention to. Do not cancel your score, because after the LSAT, everybody feels bad about it. The people who scored really well feel they did poorly. The people who scored really poorly feel they did poorly. There is like zero indication of how you feel. How you feel has zero indication for your actual score. So the only reason to cancel is, you fell asleep in the break and you missed a whole section. You entirely missed double the section. You left 3 logic games blank. Like, something where mathematically you can't get a good score. Otherwise, I strongly caution against canceling. If it's just like the regular, like, I feel bad, I felt stressed, I'm not sure that went well, in my experience, that's no indication. Lucas or Derny, I see there's a bunch of other questions. Anything on this topic that I should cover? Someone asks, okay. And you can kind of answer the ones that are just specific, like the Canada specific one. Someone asked about different majors. Actually, I'll just cover that one. In the States, again, they just got to go into GPA number. They pretty much have to rank someone who's an engineering major the same as someone who's a I don't know, political science major. Um, in Canada, they also have leeway to say like, oh, that's like a very challenging degree. Grades are generally lower. We'll give you a bit of a boost. So I'm talking about it actually. I'll just mention a bit about admissions. So in the States, what they've got these school percentiles. You can go to a site called Law School Transparency, which is a very useful site. So this is the stakes for an LSAT score. There are 2 sites you should use. Law School Transparency and Law School Numbers. So schools have percentiles for their entering class. They've got what's called a 25th percentile and a 75th percentile. Actually, I'll show a actual school here. Someone asked me about this school the other day. So this is New York Law School. And here's Law School Transparency's guide to this. So they're great. Basically, a few years ago, the American Bar Association forced law schools to release standardized data about costs, admissions, all kinds of statistics. So you can take this into account and should take it into account because schools cost a lot. And what they've got down here is admission data for the entering class. So this is a school in New York. It's sort of a middle of the run school. I don't know actually what their ranking is. But you can see here their median LSAT and their median GPA. Well, this is actually probably a lower end school. This means 25% of their class had below 149, 50% had below 154, and 75% had below, or sorry, 152, 75% had below 154. And here are the similar numbers for the GPA. So where you want to be when you're applying is above the 75th for the school you're targeting. If at this school, if you're above 3.48 and above 1.54, they'll probably give you a big scholarship. If you're in the middle or below, if you're like in the middle, they'll probably give you some money, and if you're at the bottom, they'll probably give you no money. And you can see also this class has dropped in numbers. They used to have 641 students, now they got 305. So this is kind of a bad sign about the school. Like their class is cut in half in 5 years. Their GPA and LSAT numbers have gone down. They're probably financially struggling. But their tuition, you go to the cost tab, their tuition is very high, $49,000. So if you go to a school like that at the low end of their scores, you probably get like no money and you get like a lot of debt. Like they've got this debt calculation. If you go there with no scholarship at all, you end up with $259,000 in debt, which is a monstrous number. If you get a full scholarship, you can end up with like 84,000. If they give you some cost of living discounts, you get down to this low. And that's what that means is that's like, you're not earning money for 3 years, so you have this debt based on your living costs. So massive stakes to having a better LSAT score or GPA, but at this point it's very hard to change your GPA. So the LSAT is the number, and it's hard to exaggerate like how important this is because just getting, like 5 points higher might be worth like $200,000. It's crazy. By the way, in Canada, again, the stakes are not like this. You just need a score in the mid-160s. Now, for a better school, let's see. I don't know. Oh, no, that's not. Let's see. Let's go to another New York school, NYU. So this is a much better school. And their medians, so to get to a school like this, you need to be quite high. Like, to get a scholarship there, you're going to have to be above 171. Just to get in, you probably need to be above 166. And their tuition is also going to be around 50,000, so you really want to get a high score. Especially if your GPA is below their 50th percentile. Like, if you're on the lower end here, you need to kind of get on the higher end here to get something, and you're going to be called what's called a splitter. Another thing on this side is called the employment score. So this means that like 93.6% of their grads are employed and are employed as lawyers. The other school had a score that was like 48%. So that means fewer than half of their grads become lawyers, which is pretty dismal. So you really want to check the school that you're applying to and see like, well, how many of the grads become lawyers and what will be paying to go there. Because if you have low odds of becoming a lawyer going to the school, it's probably not a good idea to go. So you have to be very careful because a lot of people get like a lot of debt and end up with no legal job or maybe even no job at all. And it's just it's kind of a grim situation. The New York Times has some good articles on people that went to law school had too much debt. So you want to consider not going if you can't get to a school that has like a good employment score and will give you a scholarship. And to estimate so these are the like rough stakes. To estimate more specific admission odds, go to that site called Law School Numbers, and they have user-entered data on what scores people got to get admitted and how much money they got. Quick note, if you're what's called an underrepresented minority, URM, chiefly that would be African Americans and certain Hispanics, it's somewhat complicated. People are often confused about who actually is a URM, and we don't have that sort of thing, that admissions category and scholarship stuff in Canada, so just check with LSAC or the schools, like, if you fall into the category, but if you do, you get a significant boost in admissions odds and financial odds. So do check that when you're looking at law school numbers. They have stuff on that. Okay, so now that I've like frightened you a little with what the stakes are for going to law school, because they're very high. Like you probably don't want to go to a school like the first one that I mentioned unless they give you a large scholarship. Now that I've frightened you a bit with the stakes, I'll talk about how to actually study so that you can get to a school that you want to and get a scholarship so that you won't have a lot of debt at the other end. So I guess I'll start from the start. Like if you're just starting out studying, what you want to do is get some kind of a good study guide. Here's one I like. I like the LSAT Trainer. It's one book. It's $40. Actually, Lucas, can you send them the LSAT book list from my site? If you Google like LSAT Hacks prep books to find it. But this is my favorite book about the LSAT. It's got very good reviews. I've read it. Like matches how I think. Uses real LSAT questions, which is something you want to look for. Like people often tell me, like, "Oh, I got like this LSAT for Dummies book. Is it good?" Like, no, it doesn't have real LSAT questions. There are a lot of LSAT prep tests. I just went over that. There's like over 80 official tests, so you don't want to use something that doesn't use real questions. The three main books that people tend to like are LSAT Trainer, Power Score, and Manhattan. Those are the main ones. If you got one of those, they're good. At that point, you should just pick based on which author's style you like. If you get another one, probably not so great. Kaplan Princeton Review, I think they use real questions now, but they're generally not considered the best as far as the LSAT goes. So you want to get a study guide and read through it, but you also want to start with a time diagnostic, and you need to time yourself officially. A good thing to time yourself, it's called the 7-Sage LSAT Proctor. So I'm just going to send this link because I see so many timing errors, and people who have already been studying, this applies to you too. Maybe especially to you because you might have worked into a bad habit by now. I see so many people timing the LSAT incorrectly. In fact, I frequently hear from people like, I was scoring like a 165 and then I went and took it, I got a 158. Sometimes it happens from panic. Sometimes it happens because the person who was studying wasn't timing themselves as strictly as they were on test day. And that's doing you no favors. So you've got to time yourself accurately. Really, really accurately. The reason I'm linking to this proctor is because if you just set it and follow it, it will force you to be really, really accurate. So I strongly recommend it for that reason. The other thing you want to do is you want to print out a bubble answer sheet. One of these things here. You can get copies online. Just Google it, like this one's on Cambridge LSAT. I mean, not this image. Actually get the PDF and print it, but they look like this. Print that for every time test you do and every time section you do, because I've actually timed it. It takes about 3 minutes to bubble in the answers. Maybe it's 2 minutes. Either way, it's a significant amount of time because you have 35 minutes per section, so that's almost 10% of your time. But a lot of people don't use these. If you're not using it, then you're giving yourself extra time on every section. And when you go in on test day, you're not going to have the same amount of time and you're going to be rushed. So you need to use this answer sheet every time. Just print out a stack of like 50 of them and always grab one and take it when you're taking a time test. It's very, very important. You also want to practice using a pencil, using only an analog watch to time yourself. I mean, you can use the proctor, stick it in the background, but then use a pencil, use a watch, an analog watch to actually check the time. They've got all kinds of rules for about how to do a timed LSAT. So you need to follow them strictly. I think I've got an article about that on Reddit. Lucas, can you find that and send that to everybody? So if you've been studying before, what you want to do is read this article and check that you're doing everything right, because chances are, if I had to guess based on my experience, like 70% of you aren't. So just make sure, because this is really important. So I'm just going to switch to like how to study in general once you get past the beginner part. Because if I said like if you just follow any reasonable method, something like the LSAT trainer is a reasonable method. If you just follow that, you're going to make some improvement. Now I'm going to talk about how you study over the long haul once you've already gotten through the part where you have gotten through the easy improvement. And a lot of people tell me this is like one of the most difficult things they've ever done. Because basically, in my view, to get better at the LSAT, once you've already gotten through that sort of easy improvement, you have to change how you think. There's no other way to get better. Because what the test is doing is it's testing your sort of like rapid thinking ability. People talk about like having the right method for the LSAT, and method is important, but I actually saw someone like, he put it a good way. Lifos Institute, I may as well credit him. He's has LSAT videos popular in Korea. He said, when most people approach the LSAT, they're going on how they feel when they're approaching the answer. Like, does this feel right? Does this feel wrong? And how he described it was to get better at what expert people are doing. Because like when I'm doing the test, I'm still choosing the answer. Well, I'm not choosing it exactly based on how I feel. Like when I choose it, I usually have a reason. But the way I get down to the answers that I think are most plausible is just sort of like a rapid feeling decision. The way he put it was, getting better at the LSAT requires like taking like the way you feel now, like actually learning the principles of logic and retraining yourself so that your intuitive feeling when you approach the answers is different than it is now. So that's what I mean by changing the way that you think. You actually have to sort of rewire your brain a bit so that your habits are different. Your habitual ways of viewing things are different. Because when I talk to people that are scoring on average at a certain level, there are characteristic mistakes that I see. People who are scoring at different levels, like, score differently. And I shouldn't have said that because you're out now probably wondering, like, wait, what are the mistakes? What am I doing? How do I fix it? I don't know. It's a big list, and it's not like, I don't have like a clear list at every level. I just sometimes see something, I'm like, oh yeah, that is something that like someone in the 150s would say. For example, like to take logical statements, usually people who are scoring at like the 140s have trouble just even understanding the logic. At the 150s, people can understand it and state it correctly, but they'll make a lot of mistakes with it. At the 160s, people rarely make mistakes. At the 170s, people just sort of intuitively think like that. Like they don't even necessarily need to do the drawings. I mean, I still make drawings, but there's a lot of situations where I could make them, but I don't need to, because you can just kind of see the logic in your head, or the way that you think is mapped to the logic. Like when I was younger, I was very annoying because I would always see logical inconsistencies when people said them. And to me, it just like came naturally. Like I just saw them. So I'd be like, oh, well, like that thing you said doesn't make sense because of this. And people get annoyed when you say that to them just in social settings. So I eventually learned like, oh, I shouldn't point out those things when people say them. Now I get paid to do it when people talk to me about the LSAT, but I managed to sort of compartmentalize that bit of my brain. But that's what people who are scoring at the 170s generally, like they actually think that way. Like they just see LSAT flaws. Like LSAT flaws are the sorts of things that happen in real life. And at a very high level, that's just intuitive. So if you're scoring at a lower level, you need to sort of actually internalize everything so that you automatically see stuff. So this demands a high degree of self-analysis. So a lot of people just take a test, then they take another test, then they take another test, and they say like, well, why am I not improving? To improve, just taking test over test is not enough. When you're studying for September, what you want to do is emphasize review and analysis. So you take a time test, but then you review it extensively. And you try and look for everything you don't understand. I talked about attitude. I'd say like the single biggest dividing line in the attitude of those who like get stuck and those who improve is those who get stuck tend to kind of take the LSAT a bit personally. Because when you're taking the LSAT, generally most people listening to this, I should have done a poll for this, like what was your GPA? But most people tend to have like good grades when you're preparing for law school. And you've generally been academically successful. So the LSAT is taking all kinds of people who were all academically successful and making you compete against each other. So it makes sense that you could be, like top of your class up till now, but then you're competing against everyone who was near the top of their class. So there's got to be a ranking there. So a lot of people take the LSAT a bit personally because, probably, for most of your life you've considered yourself smart. That's a defining part of your identity. And then all of a sudden, for the first time, the test is like a challenge in a way that other tests weren't. So some people try and defend their status as someone being smart and try and say, like, I understand this. I hear this all the time from people scoring that just have been stuck. They'll say, like, I understand it, but I'm not improving. Whereas when I tutor someone who tends to have made a large improvement, what I find is that they actually ask me more questions about a section, even if they got fewer questions wrong. So someone that makes like 12 mistakes might ask me about 5 of them. Someone that made like 5 mistakes might ask me about 12 questions. The people who make larger improvements tend to always ask, what don't I understand? Or is this how this works? They just want to know about everything, even like a seemingly inconsequential detail. They're just very, very inquisitive, and they don't say I understand. Because once you say I understand this, you stop improving at it. But I guarantee that unless you're scoring 170 plus, there's almost nothing on the test that you fully understand. Understanding is not binary. Like, just because you know something about it doesn't mean that you understand everything. And just because you got a question wrong doesn't mean that you understand nothing. On a lot of questions, you might maybe understand 37%. On another, you might understand 67%. Someone in the 170s might be up more like 92%. And when you're at that level of understanding, maybe you're going to get like 60% of the questions right, but it doesn't mean you fully got all the ones you got right and you fully missed all the ones you got wrong. So that's what you've got to be looking for when you're studying. You want to aggressively seek out all the spots that you lack some understanding. And one thing I've noticed among people that make an improvement is they've usually got some kind of a journal. Actually, I'm going to recommend another 7-Sage resource, their score tracker. This is just like a baseline score tracker. And when I say baseline, I mean it's going to give you useful statistics, but it's not all the tracking you should do. So when you enter this, you'll see like which question types, which passage topics you're worse at. And so you should start entering all of your scores there. You can make a free account. And use that to get a basic analysis of like if there's any question types you're really bad at. But what I found the students who make the most improvement do is they'll have a notebook or an Excel sheet, usually like a paper notebook, and they just like take notes on questions. They ask themselves stuff. And you should periodically review that and go back to the questions you got wrong and take another look at them and try and understand. One of the ways I've gotten a lot better at the LSAT is just I write a bunch of explanations about them. And writing those explanations, seeing questions multiple times, has made me a lot better than I used to be. I mean, so I got a 177 when I first took it. But when I was first taking it, like I was rushed, I felt stressed. I couldn't always say why something was right or wrong. I'd be down 50-50 and I'd just sort of like guess. Now I can fully explain like why something's right or wrong. I finish the sections like a lot of time left. I don't feel very stressed taking the exam. So, and I can always just explain stuff like I know why things are right or wrong, and that all came from seeing material multiple times and just leaving no stone unturned. Because when I was trying to explain stuff, like I have to figure out exactly what's going on in every answer choice to make a useful explanation. I've also gotten better by seeing questions over again. When people were tutoring with me, they would bring me stuff that they had already done or that they had had trouble with, and I had already done. And they asked, like, what's going on here? And so A, I'm seeing the material again, and B, people are asking me stuff I wouldn't necessarily think of on my own. So actually, I am going to finish up on just like how you should study, but I want to mention 2 things. One, I mentioned repetition. So especially for those of you who are retaking. Oh, and I see there's some questions that I'm going to address shortly. So someone asked, like, what do you do? No. I said repeating works well when retaking. So yeah, I've made some of the most improvement by doing material again. When you repeat material, here's the one thing you've got to know. Don't just try and get the right answer. On test day, all you want to do is get the right answer and get a higher score. That's your goal. when you're repeating, it serves you, it doesn't really help you if you get a higher score based on getting more of the answers where you kind of remembered stuff. When you're repeating, what you should be trying to do is to prove the right answer. Prove that it's correct. If you do that, it doesn't even matter if you remember what the answer is, because you can spend time figuring out why are these wrong, why is this right, what's going on here. You always want to be looking for new things in the question, not just answering it correctly. And if you keep that attitude when you're retaking material, then that will mean your repetition is going to be highly useful. Now, I mentioned I got better by tutoring. So this is another thing you can do, that some of the people who make the largest improvements have a good study partner. Not enough people do this, but a good study partner is one of the most beneficial things you can do to get better at the LSAT. So how to find one, first of all. If you're in a big city, you might just be able to find a local study group, find people on campus, find a friend who's studying. But for most people, they actually don't know anyone else studying for the LSAT. So you can just find someone to do via Skype, or Google Hangouts, whatever. I've seen some very successful study groups that ran that way. Yeah, so how to find that is go to an LSAT forum. Top law schools is a big one. Reddit LSAT forum, that's a forum I moderate. People find study partners on there. Post around, find a study partner. And then what you do is you take a section and you review it together. And you go over all the stuff that you didn't get. And what's going to happen is two things. One, they're going to ask about stuff that you hadn't even considered. You might have thought it was obvious, or you just didn't even realize there might be an issue there. But there's so much depth in the LSAT that when other people are highlighting stuff you hadn't noticed, you're going to be learning more than you would on your own when you have no feedback and exposure to other people's thoughts. The second is, we think all kinds of nonsense in our heads. Like, you ever just, say something, start to say an idea out loud, and you realize it's dumb? That's happening on the LSAT, but you're not talking to anybody about what you're doing, so you don't know which parts of your thinking are dumb. Once you get a study partner and you start talking to them, and you got to convince them of why an answer is right, you suddenly realize, oh, wait, actually, I don't know. Hold on, I got to think about this. So saying stuff out loud is extremely valuable. If you truly can't find a study partner, you can write explanations like I do. A lot of people do this, or write explanations for their own questions. But I think a study partner is more effective because you've actually got to convince someone. One other strategy, this won't apply to too many people, but say you're scoring 166 or above. If you're scoring 166 or above, something you can do that can be extremely effective is offer yourself as an extremely budget LSAT tutor. Charge $10 an hour and make clear that you're not really an expert. You just score pretty highly. So you can help someone who's in the 140s. Or if you're 170 plus, you could help someone in the 150s. And, professional LSAT tutors are expensive. So there's going to be a lot of people who would get a lot of benefit out of talking to you if you're scoring at that level. And you'll get a lot of benefit out of teaching that person. You learn so much by teaching. So for some people who are I get a lot of people like this on my site. They're high 160s. They've installed for months. They don't know what to do. They've done every prep test. They're not sure how to improve. Seek out someone studying for the LSAT who's scoring 15 to 20 points lower than you, and just say, look, I get a good score. Here's my average prep tests. I know what I'm talking about roughly, but I'm not an expert. Want some tutoring for $15 an hour. You can do this by Skype too. Actually, some people on Reddit were doing this, and they found it very helpful. It's unorthodox, but I think it may be one of the ways to break through a plateau when you're at a high level and don't know what to do next. Okay, I'm going to talk about how to study. I'm first going to look through a couple of questions. So someone asks, the prep tests are 4 sections, but the actual test is 5. Should we cannibalize the section from some practice tests to use in others? So 2 points about this. 1, first test whether you need it. Some people just have find it hard to focus by the end of the test. Some people don't. I never had trouble finishing tests. Even if I did poorly on a test, I never lost my focus. So for me, this would be useless. And for probably 50% of people at least listening to this, this won't help at all. So what you want to look for is, well, try a 5-section test and see, like, am I more tired at the end than at the start? And that will let you decide whether or not to take it again. But if you do start to do worse at the end, then you should take 5 or 6-section tests. You can just use the really early tests, like get a hold of like test 19 to 28 or something, and use some of those sections as extra sections. So you can use the older tests for drilling, and you can use the older tests for extra sections. So first, measure if you need it. Second, use the older test for it. Someone asked, how do you drill? Someone asked, how do you drill now that there's no Cambridge? I'll get to that when I'm talking about drilling, but maybe just send them the link. So how to study in brief, you take a time test, then you review it. A good method is called blind review. This was first started by 7 Sage. That means you review the section without looking at the answers. And that forces, so you review everything you weren't sure about. That forces you to actually try and see what the answer is. Because once you know the answer to the question, you're going to get bias in thinking about why it's right. If you don't know the answer, you're going to have to actually think, why is this right? Why is this wrong? Am I really sure? When you're practicing with a study partner, blind review is very effective. So you do blind review. You review everything, like everything that you're not sure about. That tends to be something high scorers do. You make notes in your notebook about stuff that you need to work on and specific questions, and periodically look back at them. And as you identify weaknesses, you also want to do drills. I have on my site, Lucas, can you send this? It's a list of questions by type. And this is just a place you can go to find questions that are like strengthened questions, weakened questions, all the question types, and drill them. And that's pretty much it for how to get better. Like, you just want to do a cycle of this and constantly be looking for weaknesses and also look for ways to drill. Like, sometimes people ask me about reading comprehension and they're like, I'm worried I'm taking too long on the passage. I'll tell them, well, like, time yourself and see how long you're taking on the passage. Time yourself and see how long you spend on reading the stimulus on an LR question. Time yourself and how long you're spending on the answer choices. Like, actually get data on what you're doing as well. And if you're like poor at logical diagrams, drill those. Like, always be looking for a specific skill you can train along with your general time practice. So I realized it's actually like running, it's been about an hour now. So what I'm going to do is give like a short overview of my site and then talk about the course, because I don't want to like keep people forever, but then I'm going to keep answering questions for those that want to stay and just keep talking a bit. Like I haven't got anything later to do tonight, so I'm going to keep going, but there's some stuff I definitely need to get to before too many people go. So the stuff that's on my site, this page actually, if you go to LSAT Hacks and click Start here, this page I kind of summarized everything that I've got, but I'll just highlight it here. First, I'm guessing most people are already signed up to this email course, but if you're not, you just put your email in here, and I'll send you a 5-part series on my best tips for all of the sections. So there's more than I can even cover in this webinar tonight in here, so I highly suggest you just put your email in there now if you're not already signed up. And then the biggest thing on the site are these free LSAT explanations. And so these are for numbered prep tests. I've got 62 to 77, and also 29 to 38. And what they are is they have an explanation for all of the different questions. And there's a analysis. This one's the most strongly supported, so there's a description of the facts. On the arguments, there's conclusion and reasoning, and something for all the answers. So like, you can use these when you're reviewing. I would review the questions on your own first, but then turn to these after you've done review and try and figure out stuff. You can also use, like, for reading comprehension, I recommend doing a couple sections where you just read everything I wrote and get a sense of like where the line references are coming and try and reverse engineer it. You can also, for things that like you think you understand, read this and check if you missed anything. You can also use this feedback for if you're identifying conclusion and reasoning correctly, which is very important. A few other things on the site. There is an article series on how to do better at each of the sections. I called it How to Get Faster because everybody asked about that, but really they're about how to do better. So you should read those. And you can follow on like social media here if you haven't already. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about, so this is like big news for the site. I've had the site since 2013, mostly had the explanations, and I'm going to be adding more of these too, by the way, now that I've finished the course and I'm about to tell you about, I have time to write more. But now I have a course, and it's in beta, so public beta. What this means is the course is finished, but I'm also going to be continually adding to it. I'll take it out of beta once I feel that it's like pretty much like I don't have anything else to say. What it is now is I taught a class prior to the June 2016 LSAT, a live class, and I did a recording of the live class, and I now have the recording online. And people have already taken this, and you can read some reviews of people that were in the class. People have found it quite helpful, and I also had a group of people that were doing a beta just of the recorded course. So they weren't in the live class, they couldn't ask questions, they just had the recordings, and they also like this guy actually was in the beta course, if I'm not mistaken. So they already it's already a functioning course, but then I'm also going to be continually adding to it. So there's places under, I'll just like go to the course itself to show you. I'm just going to log into my site here. There's a place where you can ask questions under all of the videos that are in it. And I'll talk once I find it. I won't be distracted. Oh, and this is a page for the course itself too. I actually just saw someone asking about like suggestions for test day anxiety. That's actually in the course. So right now there's 12 two-hour lessons that were from the 12 live sessions. And so someone asked about like test anxiety. That's actually in here. There's like 2 hours on just LSAT overview, how to study for the tests, the mental side of the LSAT. And you can ask comments about the questions and get replies here, or comments about the videos and get replies. And there's also notes about what's in the videos. Right now I'm working on editing the videos into shorter sections and rearranging them a bit. And then there's also going to be a video request page where if there's something that isn't there yet, you can ask for like help on a specific question or a specific concept, and I'm going to be making videos and adding to it based on what people are asking. And so, yeah, these are the notes just covering what's in the classes. You can look at this as like a rough kind of syllabus. I had someone taking notes on everything. And generally speaking, what's in the videos, I'll just like play one very briefly. There's me talking like here, and also, and looks like everybody's here, so let's get started. It's reasonable, not definitive. There's also a whiteboard where I make drawings that for logical stuff or for logic games, logical reasoning, highlighting keywords. The course covers prep test 62 to 71, which are some of the most recent LSATs. Like I thought this was a very important thing to do because the LSAT has changed quite a bit. The newer tests are getting more difficult. They have different concepts, and so I wanted to make something like a lot of the other materials cover stuff that's like from older tests in the 30s and the 40s. I wanted to make something that covered more modern stuff, and so it covers 62 to 71. So I'm just going to answer a couple questions people have about this. So someone asked how long is the access? You have 8 months access. I wanted to make it long enough that you're not going to be worrying like, will I still have this for the duration of my study period? There'll be a way to extend it if you need longer than 8 months. I just set it to expire at some point so that, eventually you stop studying for the LSAT. I don't want like all the users to be sort of zombie users that are done. But it's 8 months by default. So I'll go back to like other general questions later, but does anybody have any questions like about the course itself now? So basically, what I cover is just an overview of like the mindset for studying, and I go into a bit more depth about study methods. Like I had to cover a lot in this webinar, so I couldn't go into the same depth that I could in the course. um, there's then like a whole lesson on conditional reasoning and like if-then statements, quantity statements, how to draw everything fast, and how to make it intuitive. Then an overview of logic games, where I found I've got like a bit of a different approach than other people. You'll find a lot of stuff that's focused on like how to prove things or just like what's correct in logic games. Like they'll explain or talk about like the correct answer. I want to show you how to do things faster and how to internalize a lot of techniques that let you go faster on games, such as, for example, drawing the games on the second page beside the questions. I show like actually I can show you now. On the Logic Games article here, I've got a little drawing of how I actually diagram stuff, and I walk through in the course like how I make drawings. Like this is what my games drawings look like on every page, and I have stuff beside the questions for like easy visual access because you can lose a lot of time to like looking from all the way over in the first page over to the questions. I talk about that in Logic Games, and I go through all the logical reasoning question types, like the strategies for each of them. And then I answer a lot of individual questions. So questions that basically there's drilling sets for all the question types, and then I'll walk through a bunch of the sets and explain how to apply the method to those questions. And also, like, a lot of questions don't fit neatly into different like strategies. Like, the question types are broad categories, but you have to be flexible. So you actually get to see a lot about like my own thought process, what's going through my head, and I sort of explain what words are important and how I'm making my decision. So someone asks, if you're retaking the LSAT, is it better to take the course or just take practice test and review? Um, I think what it comes down to there is like, what have you already done, and how well are you working on your own? Because so the course is 400, but then if you look at the stakes of getting a higher LSAT score, like even like a point can be worth thousands. So if you think the course will help your studying at all, then it's probably a good idea. So if you already have been studying, you don't need to watch like lessons 1 to 12 straight through. What you can do instead is just go into the lesson that covers what you're working on and watch that. Um, and that's going to probably help guide your studies and help you review and give you some ideas for how to do things as well. Like if you just rewatch sort of the intro to reading comprehension and get an idea of like the best practices for how to do that. You don't necessarily need like a whole overview of everything. You can just watch the stuff that's relevant to you. Someone asked about a discount code. I think actually, just to make sure I've got the right one, but I was planning to give a discount code for people in the webinar. So I'm just going to go find that now. Bear with me just a moment. It'll be a 10% discount code. And that's just going to be for the people who are in the webinar live. Or, oh no, some people can make it. I'll have it in the recording. Um, Someone asked, will the discount code only be available for a certain period of time? Yeah, I'm going to, I would say, haven't decided exactly, but probably about a week. It's weird. Just going to test it to make sure it works. Okay, someone asked, is the course beneficial for somebody scoring already in the 160s? So I'll say that like most people taking the class were people from my site, and almost everyone in the class had already been studying for the LSAT. So yes, I think it is beneficial for someone in the 160s. The caveat is, you know, you probably, if you've already been studying, if you're already in the high 160s, just like someone retaking, you probably don't want to just watch everything straight through, just like you wouldn't read the LSAT trainer and watch everything straight through. Read the LSAT trainer and read everything straight through. I'm just like checking the discount works now, so I'm slightly distracted. But again, going back to the fact that like even a couple of points on the LSAT are worth thousands. I think if you think you can get any benefit from it, then the fact that you know some stuff about it, as long as you're just looking, like I think probably if you're in the 160s, your biggest benefits would be watching the intros to the sections that give you the most difficulty, um, watching like specific questions reviewed for like sections that you've already done, and then also just making video requests. Like I would love to get video requests from people who are scoring in the high 160s because you tend to ask like good questions. And so you can get a personal video from me on like certain topics. That's something that's going to be available in the beta period that won't necessarily be available later because the course will already be pretty well complete. Like there won't be much more that I want to add to it, and I would rather focus on writing explanations. But for now, you can get a lot of like personal feedback. I'll also be answering more comments than I would be later on. So those are probably the main ways that it'll help you when you're already scoring at that level. You can ask a follow-up there. Like I was looking at coupon codes the whole time, so I think I may have been a bit distracted. I'm sending the coupon code in the chat now. This gives 10% off the course, webinar 10. Let me know if something is not, if there's any issue with the code, but that should work. So someone asked how do video requests work. Basically, there's going to be a page there where it's just like video requests, and you leave a comment describing like clearly what the question is, whether it's like covering a certain logic game or a logical reasoning question, but more details better. If you just say like explain this question from this prep test, that may not be the kind of thing I think I could like add much to. But if you're like, I've got this, like I did this question, I understand this about it, I've got this specific issue. That's if it's not like an issue of general interest, I'll probably just reply with a comment. But if it's something I think is like, oh, actually that's a very good point and it's going to help the course generally, I'll reply with a video. Or if you've got a question, you're like, how should I like it's say like a general aspect of logic game studying that you want to go into more detail on, that's like something that I'm probably like especially likely to make a video on because I think it'll be generally useful. So you just clearly describe what you want to know about, and the more detail, the more I can respond to, the more likely I am to say like, yeah, that's a really good point, and I'll answer that. Uh, there's no free hours of tutoring with the course, but you can ask questions on like a questions page under the videos, and you'll be able to get answers from me. It'll just be by text or by recorded video, but I won't have the ability to like live tutor people. But there, if there's like special, yeah, you can do video requests and questions. Um, if there's someone here who bought the course over the weekend, just send Lucas. I don't think there's too many, but send Lucas a chat message and we'll figure that out. Because yeah, since you're here, I'll give you a discount code too. Yeah, the course is in US dollars, not Canadian. So someone asked, how does the course improve RC? So first, there's a general overview of reading comprehension. And if you Google around, like I've kind of got a reputation for having good reading comprehension methods. Like I've got stuff that's not elsewhere. I focus mainly on how to read more effectively, both for retention, how to find details more quickly, and ideas for how you can like train specific skills. So it just gives you like a good general overview, and then I look through specific passages. And then I also want to add more reading comprehension material. So if that's something I'm especially going to do video requests for. Um, so if you have a passage that you want to know more about, then or a reading comprehension section, that's also something that you're going to be able to get a lot of feedback on. But generally speaking, people have, like when I do tutoring, people often ask me about reading comprehension for tutoring, for which I used to charge $350 for 90 minutes. Now I charge actually $500 for 90 minutes. Because I aim not to do very much tutoring. I'd rather work on stuff like the course or explanations. But I do tutor people. And when people ask about reading comprehension tutoring, I would just sort of give them my overview of how to do reading comprehension. That overview is all here in this introduction to reading comprehension. So people were paying like $350 just for that lesson. And now that's in here, plus all the other stuff. And you can ask more requests. So basically it would help give you an idea for how to think differently about the section and how to measure your progress and how to read more effectively and focus on understanding rather than, focusing on structure and making sure you understand rather than rushing to get to the questions. Someone asked, can you email me? Instead of email for the course, it's better if you post on like a public page like this so that everyone can see the reply. But you can post whenever, and I get to the comments. So I'm just looking through more questions. I don't have any other webinars scheduled, but I probably will at some point. I might do one on like more specific sections. Someone asked how is this different from other classes. There's actually something in a review here that I think I'll just go to, if I can remember which one it was. So I'd say the biggest difference is that the course is taught by me. And that sounds obvious, but what I mean is, I'm guessing most of you, if you're on here, have been using my explanations and you like them and you find them helpful. The stuff I teach in the class is the same style and method that I use when writing these. So that's the biggest difference, assuming you found these to be different than other companies. It's a test in that style where I actually lay out the method that I use to solve things. And someone here in the review wrote, I like this, oops. One. They said, I like the simplicity of your explanations as compared to more convoluted study guides such as power scores. Sometimes simple is better and smarter, and I really find that the casual approach you take towards common sense on the test and watching it in action in your videos is helpful. For instance, like I actually find on the more recent LSATs, they're requiring you to use sort of common sense rather than being like strictly logical. And so in the course, I try to show when to apply common sense and when to be flexible in your approach and how to take a simple approach. Like on some of the logic games, people actually said like that they hadn't realized it could be that straightforward, where I just showed step by step how to do things. Same with logical reasoning. Like the LSAT uses complex language, but the concepts usually aren't that complex. So I try to break things down into simpler terms. So you have to get the book yourself. It would be basically the way licensing works. It's a lot cheaper to have you buy the book and obtain yourself than provide it with the course. Also, licensing is complicated, so this let me get the course out now. So yeah, you can buy the books on Amazon for like $20. I think that covers most of the questions about the course. So I'm going to go back to specific questions. I'm just checking something very quickly. But if anyone has other questions, just ask now and I'll cover it. No, the course doesn't use the LSAT trainer. It's just a book that I like, and it's compatible with it. Like a lot of people taking it had used the LSAT trainer. Okay, now I'm just going to pick some questions people have asked. Okay, someone asked if you're studying for the LSAT, how much time to spend on the LSAT versus a personal statement. Basically, ignore the personal statement unless your LSAT is in range. Like, personal statement is almost nothing compared to the LSAT. It's just a distraction. If your scores don't get to the right range, your personal statement won't matter at all. Get the score you need, then focus on the personal statement. You know, if you need a break from the LSAT, you can work on the personal statement a bit, but like the LSAT is what you need to be doing. So, how to structure studying for the LSAT if we're taking it for the first time? Oh yeah, one thing I guess like I would say the biggest thing to structure it is just aim to do like one prep test a week. There's only about 12 weeks left. So near the end you probably want to do more prep tests, but you should be doing a prep test a week at this point. And also focus on you should be doing a prep test a week and review, and then during the week drill the stuff that you need to work on and do time sections and review them as well. And also work in breaks. Like it's a long time, three months. A lot of people just go full out and don't take any breaks. This can actually cause your score to go down. You need to be prepared to take some time off and recharge. It's an important part of the learning process. If you ask like a more specific question about like how to structure, I can be more specific. But that's roughly it. Like about a prep test a week, more towards the end, then drill stuff and review stuff and do time sections. Study hours per day. Like, it's hard to say. You got to go partly on energy. Like on a day when you take a time test, you're probably going to have more study hours. Some days you might have fewer. 2 to 3 hours a day is a decent target, but it kind of depends. Like you want them to be productive hours. So if you're very tired, then you probably want to do less stuff and rest. If you have a lot of energy, you can keep going. You may want to modulate it a bit to your energy levels. So someone asked, how important is it to keep a rigid schedule as compared to just reviewing what you have, um, just reviewing missed problems? I think it depends on personal inclination. Like, I'm not someone who needs a lot of rigidity. Some people don't get anything done unless it's strictly planned. So kind of go on personal inclination there. Like, I generally don't need to keep a rigid schedule for anything I do. But if you know about yourself that you do need one, then you're going to have to make one. It'll be arbitrary because there's no like default study plan that's going to work for everybody. But you can make a schedule if that's something in your own experience you found you need. And I think if you also just like self-measure, like if you come to a realization like I'm just not studying at all, then you do need to set like an arbitrary schedule. But if you're studying well and making progress and you haven't had a schedule, then you're fine with that one. Someone asked, is outside reading helpful? Reading is always good, but usually it's more of like a long run thing. Like the best thing is to have been a very active reader for the past 20 years of your life. But you can't change that now. So, but if you read The Economist magazine, they tend to have the stuff closest in structure to the LSAT. Not so much the political news, but more like the economic, the history articles, the science, biographies, that kind of stuff. Reading that can be good, and any reading you do is helpful, but mostly doing more LSAT questions is the most important thing. Okay. Any tips for someone who is not traditionally a morning person on how to time studying? I mean, I'm also not a morning person, but if your test is going to be in the morning, you will have to get used to doing the LSAT in the morning. It may be worth temporarily becoming a morning person. And that's where you might need a more rigid schedule, that just going out with friends less, staying up late less, getting up in the morning, actually reorienting your life around morning study until the LSAT's done. It can be done, because I have been a morning person in the past at some periods of my life. You just have to actually do it. And but I don't think it's super important for studying itself, but you do have to get ready for a test in the morning if that's when you're taking it. The biggest improvement I've seen people make, um, really large improvements are rare. Like I've talked to someone who got to like 168 from like the low 140s um, over about 3 months. At this point, I mostly hear from people who have been studying on their own for a while. So that's the kind of improvement that I hear about, like just, like 140 to high 160s or some of the bigger ones, or like low 150s to mid 170s. But they're rare. The more standard thing is about 10 points, which if you score way below your target score, that's bad news. But that just shows like that it's going to be a very difficult task. Best time to take the test? I like June and September, especially September. September because if you need to retake it, the December one is like just afterwards, so you can still be in study mode and take it again. And December's still fine for admissions. June's also good because if you realize like, oh, I need to study again, you've got plenty of time. December is really late if that's going to be your first test and need to retake. You pretty much have to miss a cycle and wait a year. And February I don't like because you don't get your test back. Yeah, February is not disclosed. Someone asked about making flashcards for old questions. I just think that's a great idea. Um, More specifically, like, say you look at a question and you learn something about it. Some people have actually like cut out questions and then like written notes on the back of them and like just review those periodically and try and remember or figure out what they need to know about it. I think that can be very helpful. Just have like a pile of hard questions that you review, like literally cut them out. So you might need to buy 2 books to do that, or make a bunch of photocopies. You can also do flashcards for certain concepts like logical reasoning, logical questions, that kind of thing. So someone asked about speed. They said that they can get like about a 170 when they have 2 minutes per question, but otherwise they don't. I hear this so much. Basically, everyone thinks they have a speed issue. Pretty much nobody does. It is in fact a test of how fast you can do the same things. People who are better at it do it faster, generally speaking. So most people could get like 15 points higher if they had unlimited time. That's just how it is. So you want to focus on competence. With competence comes speed. And just know that like just about everyone can get better if they go faster. Oops. Sorry, I just deleted someone's question. If I didn't answer your question and you asked it within like 9 minutes, you can ask it again. Someone asked like, what are the odds for splitters? Check my law school numbers. They've got a huge data set. That's the best place to go to, or law school numbers, or my law school numbers also displays the same data. Check that to see your odds as a splitter. Someone asked, can I talk a bit more about Canadian admissions? Basically, for Canadian admissions, it's more focused on the GPA than in the States, less on the LSAT, and usually want an LSAT in the low to mid 160s. Some schools, like University of Toronto, you want a high 160s LSAT, but most places, if you got like a 163 or 164, that's fine. But you need a good GPA. Like it's got to be like 3.7, 3.8 or higher in most cases. You can check lawstudents.ca for more information on different schools' requirements. Also note that generally in Canada you want to go where you want to practice, with the exception of University of Toronto and McGill. Those are the two better ones. Everywhere else, you pretty much just want to go locally. Someone asked, how did I study? I don't recommend studying how I studied. I was living in Eastern Canada in my hometown, which is about, I don't know, it's not that big of a place, like 50,000 people. So I just went to the local bookstore and looked at LSAT books, and I bought a Kaplan one. And at the time, Kaplan didn't use real LSAT questions, as far as I know. So I did like some practice questions and then their material. So I don't even know if I like looked at a real one. Like I didn't know that they weren't real. I was scoring about like 165 when I started, according to their book. I was scoring about 173 in their book by the time I got ready to go, and then I scored a 167. So I don't know what my actual scores were because I wasn't using real material. This is why I say I don't recommend doing what I did. I didn't know better. But I found logic games were the hardest thing, so I studied for about 3 months just going through the book. And when I saw logic games were the hardest, I went back to the bookstore, got a book of logic games, and just went through all the games in about a week and got a lot better by doing them en masse. It actually often works for logic games. Like if you just do a lot of them, you can get better. Doesn't work for the other sections as much. Non-traditional students. Actually, the biggest thought I have about non-traditional students, if you're like older than average, um, law school got really expensive. Debt got crazy. So pay attention to that. It's risky enough taking a lot of debt if you're 23 and you have a whole career to pay back. If you're later on in life and you get 200,000 in debt and you don't have like a high-paying job or a lot of savings, it can be very difficult. Other than that, I don't know much about non-traditional admissions. So I would direct that to actually check Stivvy Consulting's blog. They have a lot of good information. They probably have something on that. Or check the school, see if they have some leeway on LSAT GPA. But I'm guessing they still are ranked based on LSAT GPA, so there's probably not much difference in the states. Someone asked, is it even worth it at a third-tier school? Probably not. The one exception would be if they give you a full scholarship and it's in the area you want to practice, it might be worth it. Still investigate it carefully, but they have really grim employment prospects, and they cost a lot of money, and some of them are probably going to close. If it's a for-profit school, some of them are going to have to close in the next like 3 to 7 years, so because there's fewer law applicants. So I would exercise great caution before going to one. And I want to talk a bit about this. Like people sometimes, like you can study for the LSAT for like 6 months. it feels really difficult, you want to do it, don't let that make you go to a school that's not worth going to. It's difficult to say like, oh well, I guess I couldn't get the LSAT score I needed, but not going is better than going to a school that won't get you a job and will leave you with 200,000 in debt. So don't go to a third tier school. Probably below 160, it's not a good idea to go anywhere. Um, yeah. Oh yeah, some people are like thanking me and heading out. So again, there's like that's the discount code for the course and for 10% off. And I'll share the link to the course again. Okay, so a school with a large alumni base but not a hugely well-known law school. I'm guessing it's going to be a regional school. So if it's got a lot of alumni in the region, what you want to do is just ask some law firms in the region about that school and see like, do you have you hired lawyers from there? Do you hire lawyers from there now? What percent of the class do they have to be in? Like, do they need to be top 10%? Where do you generally hire? That kind of thing. Large alumni base is not as important as just finding out like what are lawyers use in that school in general. Someone asked, how important are extracurriculars for Canadian law schools? I'm not sure. People talk about them a lot. I pretty much did none. Um, I think it may depend on the school. Like I got into University of Toronto very fast because I had a good LSAT and a decent GPA. I didn't get into McGill. I got in later as a transfer student, but not on my first try because I had a good LSAT. I don't care about that. A pretty good GPA and like no extracurriculars. I think they cared about those. And let's just say like the lower your GPA and LSAT, the more they matter. But I don't know how important they actually are. I really couldn't say. Actually, the best thing to do for a Canadian school is just go in and ask them. The admissions people are usually pretty forthright. As long as you don't say like, "Can I get in?" Phrase it more like, "What in general helps someone get in?" As long as you don't make it about you and you're not asking them to give a decision on your candidacy, they'll be pretty forthright about what they look for and what are the odds and so on. Someone asked about binding early decision. I mean, I would Google to see what people say about that, but I don't like the idea because I don't think the school is bound to give you a scholarship. And tuition is so expensive now that, if you apply to a place and you're like, all right, you're in $50,000, please. Um, that's probably not a good idea, even if it's a top 14. I mean, maybe, but it's kind of dicey. So I would check. My impression is like they have a lot of negotiating leverage over you if you can't go somewhere else, and so I don't like it for that reason. Instead, I would just apply early. Like some people applied late in the cycle, just apply early on, and you may get most of the advantages. But if money wasn't an issue and you're absolutely sure you want to go to some school, then yeah, you could probably try it. Okay, someone asked about like what about school specialties? I'm not an admissions expert but from what I've read, they're basically worth nothing. Again, talk to some lawyers in the area. They asked about like IP law in Silicon Valley. That might be an exception because Silicon Valley is pretty central to that. But talk to some law firms and see if they actually care. Law firms are pretty forthright. Just ask to interview some lawyers, take them for coffee or whatever. But in general, I've heard no, specialties don't matter. You want to go on like the baseline employment stats at the school. Someone asked about transfers. Don't bank on transfers. Um, Basically, the transfer, you've got to be in the upper end of the class. If you're applying with LSAT scores in the middle of the class, it's not a good bet that you're going to be at the top of the class. Transfers happen to some people, yes, but basically in law school admissions, Paul Campos, who wrote a good book called Don't Go to Law School Unless, calls it like the special snowflake phenomenon, where like 100% of people plan to be in the top 10%, which is mathematically impossible. Obviously, some people are in the top 10%, but it can't be everyone. And so, in general, for banking on banking on transfer, don't recommend it. Sure, you can go for it if you're in, but pick a law school that even if you can't transfer, you're still happy with the outcome. Because it's a gamble to go in saying like I won't like it if this is all I get, but I can transfer to the place I want to go. Bad idea. Someone asked like what's the ranking cutoff for schools that are worth the money? That's hard to say. I mean, on forums, like a lot of people say like T14 or bust. I don't think that's accurate. I think it's sort of like T14 or regional school with a very large scholarship. By regional school, I mean a school in a specific region that ranks well there. So outside the top 14, regional ranking matters a lot more. Like if you went to a school ranked 27 in Florida and you wanted to work in Alaska, you'd probably be way better off at a school in Alaska, even if it was ranked number 62. That's rankings are sort of meaningless, despite the fact that schools care a lot about them. They're You're way better off with the local stats. So you've got to do some diligence. Like top 14, it's pretty good. Also use the LST numbers, but you outside top 14, you really got to look at regional placement. So someone says if you don't receive a score of 160 or higher, you should wait a year. Well, you can always retake in December, but I'm just saying like if you never score above 160, you want to think long and hard before going because based on the odds, you're going to go someplace where you're not likely to get a law job. If you do get a law job, it'll be about $40,000 a year, and you'll have $200,000 in debt, which is like a mathematically really bad situation. But you got to check, based on like specific schools in your region, their employment outcome, and so on. But general, that's just like a rough guideline. The outcomes get much worse below 160 than above. Someone asked about McGill Law School. Do they not value the LSAT only because the LSAT's English and it disadvantages francophones? Yes, that's why. About 20% of people going to McGill are francophones, so it's not a fair test. So they don't care about it for that reason. Someone asked about transfers, like my own transfer. I actually don't know what it's like in the States. In Canada, it was pretty simple. I applied to two schools. I applied in the summer, I think. Um, it's like early summer, like May or June. Uh, just a pretty simple application of like why I wanted to do it plus my transcript. One let me in early summer, and then McGill let me in like a week before semester started, and I went there. But it was pretty straightforward. But you've got to be like, I had like a BB plus average, which in law school is quite good. It's like upper 30%. And I was at University of Toronto, which is like a very good school in Canada, so that was why I got into McGill. Letters of recommendation, I'm not really sure, but I think they're just sort of like in the States, what I just keep hearing is that it's like LSAT GPA above everything else. You want to have a good letter of recommendation set, but they're not going to offset anything else there. So, yeah, I would like you want to focus on that stuff, but like I said, about someone talking about the personal statement, if the LSAT's not in place, forget about the rest. You do need to do it, but it pales in comparison. Law firm like again, like all of these factors, like law firm internship, if the rest isn't there, no. Schools are kind of bound to only consider those numbers. If we're talking about Canada, yeah, letters of recommendation, internships, personal statement, they all matter quite a bit as long as you're roughly in the right range. But in the States, on like the law school admissions forum that I moderate, like no one ever mentions them. It's just LSAT GPA. I mean, well, sorry, they do mention them in terms of like what should I write in my personal statement, but when asking like what are my odds, it just doesn't come up. I'm laughing because someone actually asked like LSAT has been so different for them than anything else I've studied for. So I was expecting like, everything else was easy, this was hard. Actually, this is the opposite. They said like they don't feel they've always been the smartest, but the LSAT is they're really grasping it. No, that's not normal, but that's a really good situation to be in. So, congratulations. It means that you're figuring out how to make improvement. I mean, assume your scores are going up, and you're not just feeling that you're grasping it, that you're actually are grasping it based on improvement. That's a great situation. Definitely not normal, but like not something to complain about. Someone asked, "Will I still have time to apply with September LSAT?" Yes. Application deadlines are in the fall. Yeah, you should like do some work to get your stuff ready, like transcripts and take a while, letters of recommendation take a while. You do have to take care of that when you're still taking the LSAT. I just mean don't spend like 50-50 LSAT application prep. It should be like 90-10. And yeah, you will still have time to apply with September. It's a great time to take the LSAT. Someone asked if I'm fluent in French. Oui, je peux pas, je peux pas parler français après avoir parlé anglais pour tout ce temps-là, mais oui, je suis fluent en français. Mais à McGill, t'as pas vraiment besoin, t'as juste besoin d'être assez fluent. What I said was at McGill, you just need to show enough to show that you can understand French. If they have doubts, they'll interview you. They didn't even interview me about French. Um, but they did interview, they would interview you if they thought from your background you probably didn't speak French. And that French was actually, it came out way worse than it normally would. I think I must have been in English mode from this webinar. Someone asked how to use a journal. I don't know if there's any prescribed method. Like, I have journals with my own work, and I'll just write down like thoughts on things that I usually never look at again. Or I'll write out. So you can use it in a variety of ways. You can make notes of like stuff to work on. You can make notes on questions. You can just make general notes on how a section went. Like anything you write forces you to get out of your head and on the page. I've seen no set format, but you do want to be tracking like specific stuff to look at. Like make a list of like questions that were difficult and why, and look at them again, sort of things. Or try and look for trends. But the note-taking process itself is the most important thing. Someone says, if you have degrees for two different schools, how does that work? LSAC has a conversion formula for GPAs. I don't know the answer to that, but look up like LSAC GPA or check their site. There is a correct answer to that question, and you can find it there. Someone asks, would you recommend a buffer year between undergrad? I actually think they're great. If you go straight from undergrad to law school and then take the bar, and then soon enough you're going to be 27 and you've never like traveled or done anything else but school and work. It gets very hard to step off the track once you get into law school and start looking for a job and have debt, lots of debt too. So it's a lot easier to take a year off before than after. So if that's something that you want to do, I think it's a very good idea. And it's hard to do later. You can take the LSAT now and have the LSAT ready and then just go travel or go work for a year or like do whatever. But I think it's a good time. You don't need to, but like if you have the urge to do that kind of thing, I think it's a very good idea. Someone asks at least how many PTs should I do, and they've heard a change of it. I would say at least 20 is a good number, and you want to do at least 10 of the more recent ones. Like maybe keep some of the recent ones in reserve for a retake, but do about 10 recent ones. Just to get used to the new logic games, and to have the possibility to redo the new logic games. Like, you should do some recent ones earlier on, so that you have the ability to redo the logic games and get used to their style. Someone asked about the submission of recommendation letters, how to do it. Check LSAC; they handle all of that. I don't want to say I think it's all electronic, but like just check. I don't actually know. Do all law schools interview? No, definitely not. I wasn't interviewed at any Canadian law school. Some schools can interview. I think it's when they're on the fence, but it's not standard. I mean, they don't have time to interview everybody. So if they interview you, it means they think like they're interested, but they're not sure. Can high enough LSAT offset a low GPA? In Canada, no. In the States, yes. Check law school numbers, and you'll find information on that. Like, just you'll see people that they've got this little like scatter plot where there's like LSAT and GPA and who get in and who didn't. And so you can see what people with a certain GPA need in terms of LSAT to get admitted. Are there any advantages to taking the February LSAT? If it suits your life to take the LSAT in February, that's the advantage. There's no other advantage. I mean, every LSAT is standardized to be roughly the same. The disadvantage is you don't get it back. The advantage is you can take it in February, and if you're applying for the next year, you've also got like time to retake as well. How early is a recent prep test? So in terms of when the games and stuff started getting harder, I would say the stuff in the 70s. But another marker would be like test 52 or June 2007. Those two onwards, that's when I started having comparative reading. But I would say that the starting getting harder started like around 2013, 2014, which is, I think, the tests in the high 60s or the 170s onwards. Sites I recommend checking out. I mean, I mentioned 7 Stages Timer. Top law schools and Reddit LSAT forums are good. Spivvy Consulting for admissions. Those are the main ones I like, actually. Oh, LSAT blog has good articles. It's a bit harder to find, but lsatblog.blogspot.com, very good articles on like every aspect of the LSAT. Someone asked, on logical reasoning, do I recommend question or stimulus first? So stimulus is like the block of text, question is a little question. I read the stimulus first. Some other people who are very good at the LSAT do question first, so I'm not convinced it actually matters. But I like stimulus first because it gives you time to think about it before seeing the question. But I don't think it makes a big difference, actually, based on people seem firmly convinced that their way is right and then divided 50-50 in which way they do, which means it can't matter. If the experts are split, it's not, it can't be a determinative factor. One sec. Lucas, can you send the link for Spivvy Consulting? I just recommended it a few times. Someone asked about UBC Law School. They're a good school, especially if you want to work in British Columbia, especially if you want to work in Vancouver. And that applies generally in Canada and also in the States. Like, outside of the top 14, go where you want to work. And if in the States, make sure it's actually a good school. So someone asked, how do people score high in the LSAT back in the 90s when there are a few prep tests? You know, people get a lot. I think like just nobody practiced as much. The test may have been a bit easier, or I don't really know. Well, like I said, you can make most of your improvement in the first like month or two. You don't need to take that much stuff. So what's happening now is I think there's just been a large increase in people studying for like 6 months. People just didn't do that in the 90s. But you make 90% of your improvement at the first 6 months, first 2 months. It's just the LSAT got so much more important because of the tuition increase that suddenly a large mass of people are studying for this really long time. But it's not really the quantity of materials. It's A, that like early beginner increase, and then B, your type of analysis, which you can do even with limited materials on hand. But that's why, like, just a lot of practice that people do doesn't achieve that much once you get past the beginner gains. It's like, it's rough to hear it, but it's hard to get better at the test beyond that basic improvement. So in the 90s, people had enough material to do the basic improvement. Now, you get enough material either to make a heroic improvement or just kind of spin your wheels past the basic, depending on like how you approach it. How did reading comp change? Reading comp, well, first there's the comparative reading. Second, I find this becoming more logical reasoning like. There's more questions that require you to be logical rather than merely locating information. That's the biggest change in RC. For logic games, the biggest change is there's more unusual games. So what happened, I think because 7 Sage had such good video explanations, people were getting too good at games just by memorizing what to do. And so the LSAC decided to make games that and I'm speculating here, but what I think happened is they decided to make games that separate people who like can do games because they memorize them from the people who do games because they're actually like good at the underlying principles. So they started inserting some games that are just unusual that don't match the form of past games. That if you're actually good at games, like these games aren't hard, actually. Like I've shown them to someone who is like just very smart but had never seen the LSAT, and she found that that game was easier than some of the other games in this section. So it's not an intrinsically hard thing. It's just different. So if you all you've done is like memorize stuff, then that game is going to trip you up. So that's how games have gotten different. Not necessarily harder, just less standard. Doing some of the older games can help just get you used to different stuff. Also, once you have gotten the basic forms of games down, using explanations less, including my own. Review the games on your own first and try and figure it out yourself. Don't just memorize the explanation. That will help you be more adaptable to new stuff that takes a different form. Oh, LR. I'm actually not sure how LR got different. Like, I don't have a good enough sense. I just think it's harder because I've found that, like, when I write explanations for new tests, I just need more words. There's more subtleties to it. And I've written simultaneous explanations for new stuff and old stuff, and the new stuff just takes longer. Someone asked about Windsor Law School. I was actually just reading about that today because someone that I know said we're going there. So it's not like the worst U.S. schools, but it's certainly like the lowest of the decent schools in Ontario, and so it's going to be harder to get jobs from there than other places. I think like only 5% of people going to Windsor have it as their first choice, which tells you something. Um, and I think they have a lower articling rate. I don't actually have the accurate stats, so you'd want to do your own research, but just check the odds of you actually getting a job from there. I think their tuition is a bit more expensive than it used to be too. So someone asked, how distracting is the test environment if you haven't taken the LSAT yet? More distracting than you would expect. So I recommend actually, like, a lot of people take all their practice tests in like pristine silence in their home. Go out and take some practice tests in cafes with people around. Actually, when I take the new tests, I always do it in the cafe. Um, so I think that's a very good idea because you don't want to just get so used to this environment that doesn't match test day. On test day, there's going to be people coughing. There will probably be some people crying. That happens a lot. There'll be chairs moving around, proctors walking up and down the halls. There'll also be this kind of like a weird silence where it's like really silent so that when people make a noise, it sounds like more jarring than it would be. Like, if you're in the street, there's like a big truck goes by and you hardly notice because there's so much stuff around. But on the LSAT, there'll be like a cough and it echoes through the auditorium. So yeah, there's distractions. So get used to it by practicing in other areas. Oh, actually, one thing about that, check out your test center beforehand. Like I heard one story of a guy who had like these weird little desks at the test center. Most test centers are fine, but like if you're concerned about it, or even if you have time, just go check it out. See what the desks are like. Just it can't hurt, and it'll get you used to the room, so it doesn't feel so odd when you're there before. Next, you can even take a practice test in there if the room is just like open at sometimes. Someone asked if I had to pick one X factor for success on the LSAT, what would it be? That would be what I mentioned before. The people that say, and actually, the person asking this is the one who said they've been improving. So tell me if this applies to you. But the people that like get stuck are just trying to defend their smartness. The people that get better always tend to ask like, "What don't I know? What else can I figure out about this?" And they try to approach it like just sort of a game. Like, what else is there to see here? How do I get this right? What am I missing? Versus like trying to defend intelligence. I'm just scrolling back to some later questions. Someone asked about master's GPA. Hardly matters. They care about undergraduate GPA most of all because there's all kinds of master's programs, but the undergrad GPA is standardized. It's also what they have to report. But even in Canada, they don't care about master's GPA as much as undergrad. What's an effective way to drill? Identify a weakness, do a bunch of questions that are typed, review them, and check some explanations. So if you go to my questions by type page, you can find a list of question types. You can do those questions, then review them on your own. Blind review is good, and look at the explanation after. It's hard to do like drills exactly timed because like it's not like you've got a whole section, but you should try and have some kind of time discipline later on because you want to practice for like actually doing it with speed like you would on test day, and that's how I'd say to drill. You can also figure out other drills, like you could do a conclusion reasoning drill where you just go through a section, identify the conclusion reasoning, then check my site and see if you got it right or not. You can identify other drills. Like I talk about some of these in the course, like reading comprehension drills for how to reading comprehension drills for like how to test whether you're retaining stuff in the passage. There's a few other drills you can like think of doing. Someone asks, if you don't have much time to study between now and September, but they do have September to December, they'll have a lot of time. What should you do? In general, you want to pick a time when you can spend the most time in it, but it's a bit risky to study for aim for December. So I might study for a bit, but plan to take both September and December, or at least see how it goes. Because you also may find, like, once you start, well, I don't know, it's hard to say because you've already been studying for a while. It's a tough question. I would say it kind of depends on how much you're still improving, but you might feel more pressure if you're studying for December too. It's complicated. It kind of depends on energy levels. I would need a bit more information about the specifics to answer that effectively. Someone said on reading comp, sometimes they don't understand the passages, especially science. So for science passages, I recommend getting a bunch of back copies of The Economist and reading their science sections, which are like 3 to 4 pages. Get the print edition. They're written like LSAT passages. This will, A, get you used to understanding scientific material that's meant for regular educated people rather than scientists, and B, it'll give you a bit of a background in scientific knowledge that will help you when reading LSAT science. Other than that, review stuff using like my site for those passages to get a sense of what's going on in there. And then also just like, they'll give you a lot of complicated scientific terms. They'll say like some molecule, but then they'll say what the molecule does. Focus on the description of what the things do rather than what they're called. Because you don't actually need to be a scientist to do well at these. You just have to understand the interplay between different parts. Someone asked about University of Ottawa Law School. They've got a decent reputation. Good if you want to be in politics. Also good because they have like both French and English, so they're flexible for Ontario and Quebec. But they're not the top rank of Ontario schools. University of Toronto, Osgoode, and Queen's all have a better reputation. But they're a fine school. Someone asked if you're far from your testing site, should you book a hotel nearby or just leave very early and arrive early? I think probably a hotel might be a better idea, unless sleeping in a hotel is going to throw off your routine. Because if you wake up early and arrive early, you may be sleep deprived, and you don't want that before the LSAT. Though you could like train yourself to get up early in the weeks before the test, that would be the alternative. Actually, someone also asked about like what to do the day before test day and test day itself. I think it's a good idea to just like do nothing the day before the test, or just do some sections you've done before if you like just want to warm up a little, but like don't work too hard, don't do anything new, just like relax. That's the best thing before the test. Go for a walk, see some friends, read a book, watch a movie, whatever. And then also make to sleep, turn off your lights early so that you get sleepy. Like dim your lights, don't look at any blue screens like television, have flux in your computer, read a book instead of looking at the screen. Because a lot of people like get insomnia the night before the test, so you want to try and avoid that. You can also take a very small amount of melatonin and test this beforehand. Melatonin is the hormone that makes you sleepy. It's like naturally produced when there's no light. Like I went on a snowshoeing trip last year. There was no light but like a couple of flashlights. We all fell asleep at 7 p.m. Like we just, without light, we became exhausted. Melatonin is what does that. So to make yourself sleep a bit better in a normal way with a normal sleep cycle, because like sleeping pills don't give you the same natural sleep cycle, take a small bit of melatonin, but test it beforehand. Best to get the liquid and just do like a couple drops. The pills all have like far too large of an amount. Test it beforehand and just make sure you don't take too much and get sleepy when you wake up. And that can help you, if you have the dosage right, that can help you fall asleep on the day before the test. Someone asked, how do I integrate prep tests if they're taking my course? So there are some prep tests done in the class, meaning like there's prep tests recommended at a certain time, and then we review the prep test. But also sort of depends on your whole study period. Like when I taught the course, that was done over like a month and a half, I think. But when you're taking a recorded course, you have the option of just going through the course very quickly or going through it very slowly. So you can do your own prep test schedule for like prep tests that aren't in the class, but then also do some of the prep tests in the class like before doing those lessons. Because the class covers 62 to 71. So you might want to say like do the overview lessons of the course while doing some prep tests from outside the course. And then before doing the later lessons, like instead of your prep test from like the 50s or something, do the prep test assigned in the course and then review the lesson that talks about that prep test. Something like that. The course doesn't have, I say take like 20 or more tests. There's not like 20 scheduled prep tests in the class, so you will want to plan like prep tests around the ones that are in the test. But there's a listing of what prep tests are covered and what classes they're preceding. Tips for someone working full-time and studying. The most common thing I hear there is that after work people are tired and they can't focus effectively. So what you may want to do if you're working full-time is start going to bed earlier and waking up earlier and doing LSAT prep in the morning. This may utterly fail for you, but it's worth trying if you have like you're tired after work thing. Don't sacrifice sleep hours. Like if you're tired in any situation, you're not going to make LSAT progress if you're fatigued. Just shift your sleep cycle and then do full-time tests on the weekend rather than during the week. Good question here. Someone asked, do I need to read all of the answer choice to the last words, or can I move on to the next answer choice if I figure out the answer choice would be wrong while reading it? I often will like move on before reading the whole thing. It, of course, depends because sometimes the final words can be crucial, but sometimes early on you'll see like the choice couldn't possibly be correct based on what I talked about. Like say if I'm on a parallel reasoning question, the argument was nothing but all statements, and one of the answers says some, I'll just skip it. I guess I wouldn't mark it wrong if I just skipped it like that, but I would just say like probably not right. Whereas an answer that I had read and like I know it's not this, I would cross out the letter. So there's two different categories, like 90% wrong and definitely wrong. The ones that I skip without reading everything, but reading some of it, I'll mark as like 90% wrong, but I want to be aware I might have to check that. So you want to avoid the error of like crossing out the right answer, but you also want to give yourself the speed effectiveness of being able to skim over stuff that's probably not right. But yeah, you don't hard eliminate it because it might be right if you don't read it all. Someone asked, are law school admissions consultants worth the money? Hard to say. If I were applying to American law school, I probably would use a consultant. They can cost like $2,000, but you're looking at like a $200,000 decision. So if I thought they would increase my odds of admission or scholarship even by a tiny amount, I would probably use one. Typically, admission consultants have been admissions officers at universities and they have some inside knowledge that like I don't have. This is why I don't do admission consulting. I haven't been an admissions officer. So when you're looking at a $200,000 decision, and that's just debt, that's not talking about future, I probably would use a consultant for the same reason that, I'm saying like, someone asks like, will this course help me? Like, is it worth it? Well, like $400 when you're looking at like a $200,000 payoff, like, yes. If you think it's going to be at all helpful, it's probably a very good decision. So the same logic applies to admissions consultants. Like, this is probably the biggest financial decision you'll ever make. And so I think admissions is a good idea. The people at Spivvy would be my like go-to ones that based on what they've written. I've never worked with them personally, of course, but everything they write, they tend to give the impression that they know what they're talking about. So yeah, of course, this depends on like, can you afford $2,000? But if you can, probably worth it. Again, with the caveat that, if your LSAT's just not in place, there's nothing much an admissions consultant can do. You need to have the GPA and the LSAT before they can do anything. But then if you're in like more or less the right position, yeah, I think they probably could help. Even like advice on scholarship negotiations, they could probably help you get extra money. They've only got to be worth more than the $2,000 you spend to make it pay off. Someone asked how many schools should you apply to? I don't actually know. And it depends if it's Canada or the US, but in the US, like, it's hard to say. I'm going to pass on that question because a lot of schools just let you can apply en masse with the LSAC. They make it easy to apply. And a lot of schools give fee waivers, but you do have to tailor your personal statements. So you're going to have to keep in mind, like, how much extra personal statement time are you looking at here? And you want to, A, make sure your LSAT and GPA, but, well, LSAT's all you can change now. Make sure the LSAT's good, and make sure that you're able to focus on the ones you most care about. Like, I would aim at, like, fewer than 10 in terms of, making sure you've gotten, like, a really, like, ones that you really care about. But then you can also apply to some others just using LSAC's automated thing and give, like, a bit less effort into the personal statements. But I'm not actually, like, I don't know what the right answer to that question is, but I would aim at identifying like, some top ones you think you're a good shot at, and some regional ones as well. But there's stuff out there on like admissions books. I would check those to see what they recommend. I don't want to like advise too closely on something that I don't actually like. I haven't done it, and I don't know what the right answer is. Someone asked about law schools that say they take the average score. So a lot of law schools in the States say they consider all scores, but if you look what they do, they just care about the highest. And you can see this based on like law school numbers. Check the school specifically, but if you call them, like a lot of schools will actually say like, yeah, we just care about the highest. That's generally how things goes. Harvard and Yale might be an exception, but generally in the States, highest only is what I've heard. Someone asked about like specific PT ranges. I don't have like a firm answer to that. I would only say I think a mistake is starting at say like 45 and going up to 72. You don't want to go in order like that because that means you're just leaving the hard stuff, the new stuff till the end. You want to mix it up a bit, like maybe do like 72 early on, save like 75 for later. Just do prep tests from different time periods and aim to by the end have done at least 20 and have done most of the most recent ones while saving a few aside for reserve. So maybe, like first figure out how many you're going to keep in reserve. Second, decide of the ones that you're doing when you're going to do them with a mixed order, and then just do them. But like not a specific range. Oh, damn it. I just deleted a question. Caleb, you'd written something like yes, definitely. Could you put that in again? I accidentally hit like the delete function on it, so I'm not sure what you answered. Someone asked about like a specific major and like get a different name. Call LSAC for that kind of question. For specific admissions stuff, like the experts on how to list stuff. They'll have the answers. So just check with them. Someone asked about suggestions for people who want to practice internationally. First, like aim for a higher ranked school. You're going to need that. Also, a city with firms that have international practice is going to help. If you're in Canada, something like McGill is probably a good idea because they teach both the English and the French system. Even McGill for an American might be a good idea. But yeah, I would say like top school and in a city that has international firms. Oh yeah, so I just want to like repeat the answer that someone mentioned. I asked like this is about like the one key to improvement. And I asked if they had that attitude, like just sort of like, okay, how do I get better at this rather than yes, I understand. They said at first I would get really discouraged, so I had to kind of let the LSAT humble me. That's when I started to get better. I think that's a very good way of putting it. Um, because I'm just like noting this. Um, that's the attitude you want to have, like a humble attitude towards it, and always think like there's stuff I don't know. Oh, a few people said thank you. Like, you're welcome. Thanks for asking the good questions. It's been a pleasure doing this. There's still 52 people here, so I'm gonna keep answering some. Um, Someone asked like, what if I burn out? Good question. If I have to take some days off, how long would you suggest? So, time off. The closer you get to burnout, the more you time off, which means you should take breaks regularly so that you don't have to take a lot of time off. Like, if you just take a break while working for like 10 minutes, that can be worth like an hour's. Sorry, that can be worth like an hour's break later. When I recorded the course, it was extremely busy because I had to like teach the class, plan the class. I had to like improve my lighting setup so that it looks like it does now. I had to get my audio working. I had just come back from a trip, so I had to like clean my place, like all kinds of stuff. And so like it was really, I had to get my site like prepared for it. It was really intense. So after I finished the class, I just kind of took like a month where I did nothing, like a whole month. I did some things obviously, but it took that much time before I felt like okay, I'm like rested again. And the only reason I did that is because I had a specific timeline I had to do. Normally, I don't do that with my work. Normally, when I notice I'm getting tired, I stop and I take like a day's break or something. So you want to cultivate the sense of noticing when you're overworking yourself and then fixing it by taking a break, by sleeping well, and so on. Someone asked if they can buy the course in Canadian dollars. So it's priced in US. If you use a credit card, it will just buy it. Like you can't buy it cheaper by using Canadian dollars because there's like a 30% difference. Um, but if you use a credit card or PayPal, it will work. It's in US because like 90% of people on the site are from the US or somewhere abroad that isn't Canada, so I priced it in US even though I'm in Canada. But if you use a discount code, it'll be somewhat cheaper. Someone said the LSAT seems like the most intimidating thing in the world, but I feel more prepared. It is intimidating, though. I want to add actually, like when I was studying, I actually just kind of viewed it as like a game, like a fun game, because I didn't know that whether I wanted to go to law school. I was just kind of like, oh, I'll take this and see, and that really helped because I didn't care. I didn't care about the score I got. If I got a really bad, if I didn't, well, that wasn't anyway. If I didn't get a 177, I would have been fine. Um, it would be, it didn't matter. Even if I got like a 160 or 150 somehow, like if I just fell asleep during the test or I don't know, completely panicked, it wouldn't have made a difference. So that freed me to just focus on like, oh, what's going on in this test? This is interesting. There are like interesting problems. How does it work? You want to try and have that attitude. Now, I've been talking all night about like, the massive amount of debt and so on, so that makes it harder to have that attitude. What I recommend to people is actually it's an old Stoic practice from back in Roman times. It's called Seneca recommended. It's called negative visualization. And that's basically where you imagine that the worst case scenario happens. And Seneca actually did this. Like he spent time he would dress in rags to imagine he was like one of the richest men in Rome. He would dress in rags to imagine himself losing all of his money. He would eat poor food. He would imagine all of his family dying. He would imagine all kinds of bad things. He would actually rehearse them or just think about them. And you may think like, you're some rich guy. Like, what's he know about troubles? This won't work for like this situation. But actually, Seneca was ordered by the emperor to kill himself, and he just did eventually. Like that was the thing back then. He was sentenced to death effectively, and after a lifetime of rehearsing for that, he just said goodbye to his friends, enjoyed his last day, and then went because he didn't panic because he'd already been prepared for it. Now, it's an extreme example, but you can use this for any situation. What you want to do for the LSAT is imagine what happens to your life if you just get a terrible score. What happens? Usually, it's actually not that bad. If you're in a position to get into a good law school, you've probably got alternate options in your life. And that doesn't mean you want those options. You want to go to law school. But if you imagine a worst case scenario and what would you do and what would happen, then suddenly the LSAT seems to have less importance, and you can approach it without that kind of like intimidation. So I actually had a student who had like panic attacks on test day. She had it happen twice. And so I just like asked her what would she do with her life if she got a bad score again. And we talked about it. And then she started just like talking about that with her fiance, like what she would do and so on. And she imagined the alternate possibility. And then she went and took the LSAT and she didn't have a panic attack. And she got a good score. So that imagining the alternatives, imagining what it would be like if you didn't achieve it, can paradoxically help you achieve it. Someone asked, should I explain in the personal statement if they got like a 136 due to like lack of sleep due to anxiety, and then let's say you score 160? Definitely. Except not the personal statement. Put it in what's called I think, if I'm getting that right. Because that's definitely something that someone would want explained. Even if they're only considering the highest, it would be like, well, what happened? And if you just say like, I slept not at all, and that's a reasonable explanation. I was worried about the test. I couldn't fall asleep, and I got a bad score. I took it again. I was in normal conditions. I got a good score. There's like specific guides in writing addendums, but that seems like something you would want to explain, yeah. Okay, so someone just asked about test anxiety while doing the exam. So the thing I just said is actually like one of my biggest tips about test anxiety. But the other one is breaks in mindfulness. You know, the test is long, so you've got to take small pauses. If you notice yourself getting stressed, just like stop and take like 3 deep breaths. That takes like 7 seconds. That's not going to cause you to run out of time, but it will refocus you and like slow the stress. And in general, just cultivate the sense of noticing, like, oh, I'm stressed right now, and then take a small break. This helps with burnout over the long run too. Like a lot of burnout just comes from utterly ignoring signs from your body and your mind that you are overwhelmed. If you notice, like, oh, I'm overwhelmed right now, and just take a break, you won't get burnt out. And if you start to feel like a bit of anxiety in the test, and you pause and breathe and think like, oh, actually, no, it's fine. Like think about why you're anxious, and you're like, oh, actually, no, I just like saw a question was worried, but it's not actually a big deal. You won't get anxiety in the same ways if you just suppress all of that and let thoughts build up and don't process them. So take small breaks and breathe. I talk a bit more about this in the first lesson of the course. Um, but generally it's about that, and also having a process you can return to, so you're not just like saying, all right, got to do well. You actually like know things that you're going to do. It's easier to follow a process under stress than it is to hold all the information in your head. Someone asked, did I share a discount code? Yes. It's in the chat, webinar 10. I also just sent it privately. Oh, I'll just send it to all. That's the discount code. Someone said their screen froze. Could you ask the question? I'm actually not sure what you were referring to. Someone asks, how do you simulate the adrenaline rush that you get when taking the actual test? I don't know. That's hard to say. Probably the only way to do it would be, say, like, you got a GMAT test and then hired a mercenary and said, shoot me if I don't get a better score on this test. That would probably give you an adrenaline rush, but it's not, you can't really simulate it because you're not normally doing something with a piece of paper that has high stakes. That's it. I mean, you could get adrenaline from going on a roller coaster, but it's not the same thing. Or, well, it is the same thing, but it doesn't interfere with your being on a roller coaster in the same way that adrenaline interferes with the LSAT. I'd say the stronger approach is that like visualization stuff to avoid having it trigger an adrenaline response in the first place. This can be done. Like, you're still going to have some stress on test day, but you can avoid like the really, really heavy adrenaline rush by framing it. Yeah, I should like expand on this mercenary idea. It could probably is the closest simulation. Some people might actually pay for that. There's this good Michael Douglas movie, well, interesting Michael Douglas movie from the early 90s where actually he's this rich guy bored with life, and his brother for his birthday buys him this ticket to this company that promises to like simulate a destruction of your life and like terrorize you. And he was a bit confused. He went to it, and then weird stuff started happening. He went back. The company wasn't there, and he'd given them all kinds of personal information, and he didn't know if he was really being hunted or if it was the plan or what. It's probably the closest you can come. Someone asked, what do I think of taking back-to-back LSAT tests, like 8 full sections? I think for people that have endurance issues, this is an interesting strategy. You could even do this with tests you've already done. So, you're not wasting new prep tests, but you just are just training endurance. I think that's a good idea if you need endurance training, but like try it and see the results, because I personally never had endurance issues. So when I'm speaking about endurance, I'm just suggesting things that like I think they seem like they plausibly could work or people have said worked for them. So try an 8-section test, see if the 4 and 5-section ones seem easier to you. If it works, keep doing it with old prep tests that you've done already. If not, try something else. Oh, yeah. Where do you mention poor score? It's in the addendum. Though, just like check about like get a look at Spivvy's site or like Anne Levine's book on admissions is pretty good. She talks about that. I don't remember the name of the movie. Lucas, can you Google that? All right. A few more people asking questions. Someone asked about UBC. Yeah, they're pretty hard to get into LSAT wise. Like they're in a major city, best school in British Columbia. They are a bit harder to get into. So someone asks if they have too many unknowns and they can't move forward on a PT, or if it takes endless time analyzing, how should I deal with that? I mean, like, there are two ways. One, you can kind of focus on the stuff that you don't know it, but you feel like it's within reach. And also, like, the person I said who got like major improvements from like 142 to like 168, she said she reviewed every question. At a certain point, you just have to do a lot of review. But you could do it with a study partner for some of it, like that'll help make it less dull. Um, but yeah, I think there's no way around the fact that you do just have to review a lot of stuff. But you can try and prioritize and like not overwhelm yourself and just review the stuff that's like you're close to knowing and leave the higher level stuff until you've already gotten to lower levels. The game that sounds about right for the Michael Douglas movie. Someone asked how's Osgood, York University in Canada. Good school, annoying location. You're north of the town rather than in it, and not as good as University of Toronto, but they're a solid school. University of Toronto is going to be good all over Ontario. Osgood still will be, but they're going to be stronger in Toronto, roughly speaking. But yeah, it's a good school. Um, so I think you're fine pretty much wherever you want to go in Ontario with Osgood. If you want to go nationally, then go to the school in your province or go to University of Toronto. Someone asked, when am I going to have explanations up for Prep Test 78? Um, Probably in like a week or so, I'll have like a PDF up, and then it'll be up on my site like 2 weeks after that, thereabouts. Someone asked like, what do I think is the best prep class? I mean, I think mine is quite effective and very good to try. Oh, and I should also mention there's like I've got a 7-day satisfaction guarantee in the course, so you can try it, and if you find it's not for you, then you can ask for a refund. Um, should have mentioned that earlier. But yeah, so I think this is a course that like people taking it had very positive feedback, and it's only going to get better as I keep adding stuff to it. But other than that, like Seven Sage and Manhattan are two companies that I think are good. What do US? Someone asked, what do U.S. law schools think about international students' GPA? Check the LSAT conversion, but they have a formula for that, and I mean they do care about your GPA. It's just it depends how they. Someone asks about my own law school experience. How long did I practice law after I graduated, and why am I not doing it? I actually didn't finish. So I did 1 year at the University of Toronto, half a year at McGill, but then I left because I figured out how to start a business and started my LSAT business then. And like I never had a strong desire to be a lawyer. I just thought I would start a law practice as a way not to have a job. But once I figured out how to start a business in general, I just left to do that because I find it much more interesting. Someone asked for my thoughts on Blueprint. They're they've got some good stuff and some shady origins. They actually started by like stealing materials from test masters. There was a big lawsuit about that. You can actually like read the whole lawsuit. They, I think, I'm not sure, but I think they may have used some sock puppet accounts on my forum. I'm not sure about that though. It's hard to prove that kind of thing. Um, and generally speaking, like they're just a bit shadier. But they do have some good reviews, as far as I know. Like then again, I don't know how much of that is like just them doing it. So I'm kind of on the fence about them, but I haven't really heard, I've heard people say like, oh, I did Manhattan, it really helped. I did Seven Sage, it really helped. Like I read your explanations, it really helped. Um, I used the LSAT trainer, it really helped. Like I've heard all of these things. I haven't had that many people that I've worked with personally say, I did Blueprint and it really helped. I've had some, but I've heard more people say like, I took a Blueprint course or just nothing. So they're not on my recommended list. It's not like Kaplan though, where like I just said like no, don't do it. It's just I don't really know what the situation is. I think they probably have like some good instructors because they pay well, but in general, they're not one that I could recommend. Yeah, all right, there we go. Someone just replied and says I took Blueprint and it really helped. So yeah, it there are some cases that but they say just super expensive. Um, so yeah, like why I was being so hesitant. Like if I just thought they were terrible, I would say they're terrible and they're scammy. But the thing is, they have some good methods, they have some good instructors. It's just there's also some shadiness around them. And I've heard less enthusiasm about them compared to other methods. But they're not worthless like some other companies. That's why I'm kind of on the fence there in like hedging. Someone asks, are international students eligible for money at American schools? I would check with the schools about that. It's complicated. You can definitely get some money. Like I applied to NYU for or like American schools for fun, and I got some money from no Columbia. But like loans, I think less so, and there might be certain scholarships you can't get. So you'd have to look into the details. Someone asked, should we review all answer choices? I think the best idea is just to review the stuff that you're not sure about. But if it's not seeing results, start reviewing more stuff. So when you're doing a section, that's when you should circle like I don't know, get this answer, I don't get this question, and review it blind afterwards. Someone says, how far out would you recommend starting your course? I think it's a good thing to start early because I've got sections on like just intro sections to arguments, logic games, logical reasoning, like just my main strategies for all those sections that I think are good to start practicing with. But then you could potentially pause, do some practice, and come back and look at the other stuff, or just look through it more slowly. Then ask questions. They'll be like see also like the stuff that I'm adding. But I think it's good to get like the foundational lessons early on. So just like when you start studying. Someone asked what I think about multiple retakes. Uh, I think like they're a good idea if you expect you might get a higher score in the States. That's what like petitioning to have a score canceled. I don't think that unless there's like extreme circumstances, it seems unlikely, but you could ask LSAC about that. But like it would have to be really exceptional, especially since they have a score cancellation process. Um, but retakes are a good idea in the States because there's no downside. Someone asked what was my GPA. I had a 3.67 out of 4.3. I forget what it worked out to on LSAC GPA. Um, and their admissions would have been, different back when I applied. I don't know if their GPA has gone up or down since. Someone asked about tutors. They said they're self-studying and they're not sure if they should get a tutor. So I think a lot of people who self-study do use tutors. What a tutor can do is just sort of like they've got more experience than you, and so they know some common failure points you might not be aware of. They can see sort of like how you approach questions and um, give in stuff like tailored to you. They can ask you questions you wouldn't have thought of, so they can be very helpful. The trick is finding like a good one. I myself like don't really do like long run tutoring. Actually, if you want to, can I get Lucas to message you if you're interested in potentially working with her. Um, and she can probably tell you a bit more about like what a tutor can do. Lucas, if you want to message her, just in the questions there, it's like one of the most recent ones. You can potentially talk to her more about that. Okay, so there's like a bunch of questions from like earlier than 8:50 p.m. Um, I'm not going to answer those because the people might have already left. But if you're still here and I didn't answer your question, just repost it. I'm just going to go through them just in case there's something like really good. Someone asked, did I retake or was 177 my original score? Yeah, it was my original score. I just got that in one take. One moment, I'll be right back. Oh, someone asked a good question. Do I think eating and sleeping and exercise affect studying? Definitely. That plus breaks. I think those four things, eating, exercise, sleeping, and breaks, are very crucial to making long run progress. Once you get past the like 2 month easy improvement period, those are essential. Yeah, it's like training for a sport, actually. Um, and actually, there's like studies coming out. I just saw something recently about how like exercise releases a protein that helps brain function. Just like the brain is part of the body, it needs a well functioning body. When you, I think like if you lose sleep, like your uh, insulin regulation gets a lot worse. Like everything just starts to get worse if you don't sleep. So the sleep that you do, the food you put in, whether you exercise, whether you rest, are all very crucial for the mind working effectively. So yeah, I think like you need to take care of those first. I'm not productive personally if I don't do those right. And I think if you talk to most people that that perform at a high level at anything, they're always taking care of that stuff. You can't skimp out on that if you want high performance. So someone asked about retakes in Canada. Not great unless you're sure you're going to get a higher score because they don't just take the highest in Canada. It's not like the States. I think I'm just going to take like a couple more questions and then call it a night. Someone asked about speed issues in general. There's not much you can do to improve your reading speed. Like in the email course, in my reading email, and on my article about how to go faster at reading comprehension that you can find on like the start here part of my page, I talk a bit about it, but you can't expect much of a gain. And mostly you can expect a bit of a gain in skimming to locate information. Like I mentioned a few things that might produce a bit of a speed increase, but mostly reading speed is dependent on like past reading and vocabulary level and just a few other factors that are built over the long run. Reading more will help, but there's no way to go significantly faster. Do I think redoing the same questions help? Yeah, I think like I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's like extremely useful. I've learned so much when students brought like questions to me that I already seen before, and I had to just keep going over them. So I highly recommend repeating. Someone asked my experience in dealing with or advising the students from non-English background. Um, that's something I actually want to know a bit more about in terms of like hard data. Like I've worked with students from non-English backgrounds. I can't say that I actually know what works or what's different. I don't have expertise on it in the same way I have expertise on the LSAT. So it's something on my list, especially as like a lot of people taking the LSAT are from countries outside the States or are second language speakers in America. So that's on my list. But one thing I can say, I just worked with someone from Korea. They commented that they get tired faster. And I think that's a good point. So what I mentioned about like sleep and exercise and breaks and so on is probably doubly important for someone with a English as a second language background because it's more cognitively taxing than it is for reading in your native language. Like I speak other languages. I remember when I was learning Spanish, I did this internship in Cuba, and I had these documents to read, and I would get headaches because it was like so much harder. In English, I would find the same documents like boring potentially, but they wouldn't be hard. So that's the one thing I can think of, like just really make sure you're taking care of all of the things that affect stress and fatigue because you have less room for error there than someone who's a native speaker is. Like now, I talk about all this, but since I've done the LSAT so long, it's actually intuitive to me. I can do the LSAT just fine if I'm tired. I get stressed and I don't like it, but I get I get the questions right. So because for me it's an intuitive thing, I can afford to, be tired, have like not exercise, like just be in poor condition, and still do the LSAT. But conversely, if it's not your native language, you have way less leeway to be anything but, like well rested and in a condition where you'll have more energy and less fatigue. Also, I think it's good to like look for like lists of vocabulary words for the LSAT. Like LSAT blog has some lists of words that you want to memorize because there may be some words that come up frequently that you don't know as well as a native speaker would. Also, you want to like pay attention to what words come up in the LSAT that are slowing you down and just look them up in a dictionary. Like, I think everybody studying for the LSAT should have a dictionary handy. But pay more attention to words that repeat and really try and master them because there's certain words that are just there on the LSAT quite a bit, and you really want to get them down so that you know them really, really well, so that they're not slowing you down. Because like, every student has this, even native speakers on the LSAT just like don't know the words as well as they ought to, but you're going to find that's more of an issue as a second language speaker. So I would focus on those two things, and if anyone has any resources on like English as a second language speaker doing standardized tests or similar stuff, I'm very interested in learning more about the topic, and send me an email. It's something I want to know more about. And actually, on that point, anyone who's studying for the LSAT with English as a second language have anything they want to add to what I just said? Okay, just mopping up a couple other questions that people followed up. Instead of doing different questions, repeating is better. I mean, you still need to do different questions, but I think people generally don't repeat enough. Especially ones that gave you trouble. You want to just go back to those periodically, and then also redo tests you took a while ago. Someone asks, how long and how often do you exercise? It varies a bit. Personally, I do barbells for 3 times a week. I do like intense weightlifting, and then I just walk around a lot every day. So I think on like a daily basis, it's good to walk. Also take breaks at home, which is like walk around your house. But have some kind of a low intensity thing every day. and then do a few things every day where I think you're either like running fast or um, doing push-ups or weightlifting or something. Or it could be dancing, like anything kind of intense. I don't really jog or do medium intensity stuff, so I can't say how that fits in, but that's what I do. Someone asked to say they scored highly on each section individually, but they can't put it together in one test. Is this stamina or are they getting easy sections right? There aren't really easy sections. So that sounds very much like a stamina issue, and I think you're a good candidate for doing more prep tests. Sorry, longer prep tests, like adding extra sections, or even trying like that 8 section method and seeing what happens. So someone asked about like cooking and how long do you sleep? I sleep about 8 hours, and I would say like the amount of time that you would sleep if A, you didn't have an alarm and you just always slept until you wanted to, like you're not in a sleep deficit. That's the amount of time you should sleep. Some people seem to require less sleep or more sleep. For me, it's about 8 hours. I think cooking by yourself or for yourself is a very good idea. Restaurants, it depends on the restaurant, but usually they're not quite as healthy as what you can make by yourself. So cooking can also be a good break. Okay, I'm gonna call it a night there. So I'll just end by saying thanks everyone for coming. I hope to see some of you in the course. I'm just sending the link again here, and I'm gonna send the discount code. It's in the chat. So webinar 10 is the discount code, and the course is here. So I hope to see some of you there, and there'll be a recording of this sent after the webinar. Probably tomorrow it will arrive. So thanks everyone. It's been good questions. I was just laughing. I sent it the email about technical errors from people who wanted to join. Someone replied and said, I don't have a computer right now, which would be a bar to joining the webinar. Oh,